Good morning, everyone, especially the viewing and listening audience, to the 22nd meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Today, the committee is convening its second follow-up inquiry into the implementation of the new Public Procurement System. Our first follow-up inquiry into the new public procurement regime was conducted, you may recall, in November 2022. Since then, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015 and its subsequent amendments have been fully proclaimed. Regulations were submitted and approved by Parliament, and the rollout of the new system has commenced. As such, the purpose of the inquiry today is to receive updates or feedback from the Office of Procurement Regulation, its line ministry, and other relevant stakeholders regarding the implementation of the new public procurement system. Members of the listening and viewing audience are invited to post or send their comments via the Parliament's various social media platforms, Facebook page, the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView, and X, formerly Twitter. I had no idea that so many members of the public looked on at what was happening in these committee meetings. And I was thinking that it would be perhaps a great source of revenue if we were to advertise, because a lot of people meet me and talk about what they saw and heard. But it's not for me really to recommend that. It was just a thought. I welcome officials of the Office of Procurement Regulation and the Ministry of Finance to this meeting. I am Hazel Thompson-Ahi, chairman of this committee, and I will now invite members of the committee to introduce themselves to you. Beginning on my right.
Good morning. Hasselbachers, member.
Good morning, Keith Scotland, member.
Morning, everyone. Welcome, Lawrence Hislop, member.
Good morning, everyone. Saddam Hussein, member, and I want to wish you all a Happy New Year.
Good morning and Happy New Year to all of you as well. I am Jayanti Ramdial.
I will now invite officers of the entities mentioned above to introduce themselves. Ministry of Finance, perhaps we can begin with you.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee, and members of the viewing audience. My name is Michelle Durham-Kisoon. I am a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, and Happy New Year to all.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. Jonathan Suhon, Acting Treasury Solicitor.
Office of Procurement Regulation.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Beverly Khan, Chairman and Procurement Regulator.
Good morning, members, and Happy New Year, everyone. I am Robert Subrayan, Chief Operations Officer.
Good morning, everyone. Hafsa Suknanan, Policy Officer, Office of the Procurement Regulation.
Good morning, members. Good morning, Chairman. Lindy Ann Mitchell, Head Legal.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Cressie Ann Ellis, Senior Auditor, Office of Procurement Regulation.
Thank you. I should follow your lead and also wish you a Happy New Year, because the work that you have to do, very challenging. Let me remind you and inform the audience, the viewing audience and listening audience, of the objectives of the inquiry. 1, to examine the OPR effectiveness in executing its oversight and investigative functions in light of the full proclamation of the PPDPP Act. 2, to conduct a preliminary examination of the level of compliance of public bodies with the requirements of the public procurement legislative framework. 3, to assess the challenges that public bodies and the private sector are experiencing in implementing and adhering to the requirements of the Public Procurement Legislative Framework. And 4, to obtain further insights into the plans, strategies, and initiatives that are being pursued across the public and private sectors to achieve a higher level of compliance with the requirements of the Public Procurement Legislative Framework. Now, these 4 objectives are extremely weighty. And when we looked at the number of issues that arose out of your submissions to us, we concluded that it would not be possible to deal with all of that in one sitting. So we will have to invite you back. So once, twice, 3 times we will have you, because this is so important for the society. It's something that is relatively new, and you know the work that you have to do, it really impacts just about everybody who's doing business in the society. And we need to get it right. And we need to give you as much assistance, and see, you ought to bring to us whatever assistance that you would need and where you are in the whole process, so that the society will understand, because you know you've been having a lot of, I don't want to call it pushback, but a lot of challenges dealing with the various entities. So we will invite you once more to come. So today we will deal with objectives 1 and 2, and take it from there. So now I'll invite opening statements, and we ask you to keep it short. You have opportunity later on to develop your points. But just no more than 2 minutes, please. Sometimes we ask for opening statements. We ask for 2 minutes. And you look at television, and you see sometimes, you know, we don't want to say, well, stop, halt now. So we leave it to you to understand. Just 2 minutes. So we call on Ms. Michelle Durham-Kissoon, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, to begin, and she'll be followed by Ms. Beverly Kahn, Procurement Regulator, Office of Procurement Regulator. Yes?
Thank you,
Begin.
Madam Chair. In the interest of brevity, I just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to give the update as you require and as is required by this committee. The Ministry of Finance is a procuring entity under the legislation, so we are subject to the legislation as well, but we also have the privilege of working with the Office of Procurement Regulation in making sure that this regime is up and running according to legislation for the benefit of society. So I thank you for inviting us here this morning.
Good morning again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Section 13(2)(b) of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act stipulates that the OPR is accountable solely to the Parliament. We therefore welcome the opportunity to appear before this committee to account for our work and our plans going forward. We acknowledge that the journey towards building a robust and effective public procurement regime with the OPR at the regulatory helm is an evolving process that requires time, dedication, and strategic investment. The OPR remains committed to ensuring compliance, supporting public bodies as well as suppliers and contractors, while fiercely safeguarding our independence to achieve the objects of the Act. We stand ready to discuss our progress, challenges, and the future plans with you today and in the upcoming sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Members of the committee?
As per discussed, may I start, please?
You all introduce yourself.
You did it already.
Okay. Yes. Okay, we will begin the questioning now, please, the process.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning. This is to the Ministry and the Ministry of Finance and also the Procurement Department. We are receiving the benefits of initial interaction after the proclamation. What plans does the Ministry of Finance and the Office of Procurement have working together to ensure, in the context of compliance, that there is still an emphasis on the ease of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago? And do you think that the procurement process as it is now is assisting in helping to get a greater ease of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago?
Thank you, Member. If you leave, Chairman, I will start. One of the concerns of the procuring entities, including Ministry of Finance and other ministries, departments, state bodies, was the concern for the onerous procedures that had to be followed, even if you were procuring minus goods and services. And to that end, we worked with the office to enact the simplified procedures, meaning for procurement of $1 million or less, that the procedures were less onerous. So we managed to work together and get those regulations through to Parliament. And I think that was a major breakthrough in facilitating the ease of business, as you've said it, Member. And I think I can leave it there at this point. Chairman, I don't know if you wish to continue.
Yes, thank you very much. Through you, Chair. The system as it is now operating is not facilitating ease of
Wait, hold on, I'm not hearing you. Say again, please.
I said the system as it is now operating is not facilitating ease of doing business, because the environment in which the system is operating was not ready for it. That is, being very honest, okay? So, but it was a significant change from what existed before under the Central Tenders Board Act, right? This new regime requires procuring professionals or officers not to treat procurement as a transaction, but as a strategic endeavor. It requires a lot of thought. It moved away from being under the CTB rules base to now being principle base. The Act speaks to the principles, transparent, the good governance principles, right? And we have a situation as well where readiness to operate under the new legislative framework is sadly lacking. We do not have the human resource capacity as it stands now throughout the public bodies to be able to engage with the system in a meaningful way. In addition, systems have not changed, particularly in ministries and departments, in terms of how do you follow the process of the new public procurement regime. So what you had since full proclamation, you had the process, everything stifled. No procurements were taking place. Most people didn't understand what to do. The system did not allow for it to progress. And that is the situation that the OPR has had to regulate. I want to say, however, that this is not unique to our circumstances or to our country. Any country that has taken on board public procurement reform, as we have done,
Yes.
has encountered that kind of challenge. So what are we doing? Well, the first thing on the ground level is that you need to build capacity. Okay? You need to train persons, many of whom are not procurement professionals or have much knowledge about procurement. And therefore, in terms of the act and even understanding when you say a principle-based approach and how do you apply the thought processes to ensure that you get value for money, transparency, accountability. How do you ensure fairness and equity is not there. A lot in ministries and departments in particular, because I want to say the state enterprises and statutory bodies have a better level of capability. But in terms of ministries and departments, it is a serious issue.
So, that being said, as you sit in the chair and you have the Ministry of Finance there, Chairman, through you, may I ask you then to give us a template? You've now started to have the experience, so you must know where the lacuna lie, you must know what suggestions you have. Could you then prepare something, a roadmap, having utilized your experience, having utilized the resources of the Ministry of Finance, that will assist us in a short term, and because we don't have time, because it doesn't make us attractive for external investors, even for local investors, to see how we can, at least in the short term, improve the ease of doing business, whilst, of course, Chairman, being compliant with the Act. Can you undertake to give us that? If one thing comes out of this inquiry, if that is one thing, Chairman, I think we would have done quite well. Could you undertake to provide that for us, please?
Through you, Chair. Absolutely, member. In fact, we are already on the road in a number of areas that we have identified, if I may be permitted to identify a few. Last week, we started the training of 125 public officers. The OPR does not have a training mandate, but we having looked at the system for the past 21 months, we understood that we just could not sit back and speak to the problems of regulating without doing something about it. So last week, we started the training in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, the training at the very basic level of 125 public officers, and we will be repeating that before the year's end. In addition, the OPR has embarked on a change management strategy. A huge problem that we are seeing is just resistance to change. So some people don't understand. There are people who understand what to do, but they are resisting moving from the status quo, right? So we initiated that exercise. It is something that perhaps we should have done before, that in transitioning to such a drastically different system, to understand that change management is absolutely necessary. We are also at this point in time to alleviate the pressure that occurred with the procurement depository in particular, and that is perhaps what is mostly aligned with the ease of doing business. The system was extremely onerous. What was designed, I am being honest, it was extremely onerous, and it required suppliers and contractors, including international, to put what they would consider to be highly confidential information, financial information. It required even smaller business to adhere to the same requirements as the larger ones. So we are working with the Ministry of Finance now. We are near the end stages of changes to the regulations that will allow for the procurement depository to no longer be the platform for pre-qualification of suppliers and contractors, but essentially to be a registration platform. Because in any, sorry.
Could you not also look at the option of staying within your regulatory framework, but making the process less onerous? Because once you say that to business people, onerous, they shy away, because doing business in itself sometimes is stressful. Why would you want to clothe it now with an aspect of onerousness? So could you look at, in coming up with your suggestions, some way within the regulatory framework of making the process less onerous? And undertake to give us that, Chairman. You said the time frame. What time frame would you suggest, Madam Chair, to produce the document?
Perhaps we can get from you what time frame you think would be a reasonable and practical time to do this, rather than imposing it on you. Having regard to the rationale and your capacity in terms of staff and work, what do you think is the best you can do?
The benefit that we have at this time, Madam Chair, is that we are in the process of completing our second full fiscal year. Well, it is our second report, but it's the first fiscal year report to submit to the Parliament. Mm-hmm. That will come within a month, okay? So we are in the process of the analysis and synthesizing of information. So I would say to you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, that certainly in 2 months we can have that delivered, if that is acceptable. If only because we really would like to finish the first full fiscal year report. We can aim to do it
6 weeks?
We certainly can aim to do that. We are fully apprised of the issues and what are our plans going forward. Mm-hmm. As I indicated, we are in the process of completing a number of changes to regulations that will indeed do what the member has indicated. It will make it less onerous on suppliers and contractors and all public bodies.
Weeks.
Certainly.
Thank you very much. It will help both sides, you see, help you and it will also help them. Because ultimately, everybody wants the same thing, you know. But it's just that some people have, you know, heavier duties to produce the desired result of compliance and ease of doing business. Thank you.
If I may,
yes.
If I may, Madam Chair. I wanted to seek clarification. The roadmap would include the actions to be taken by the OPR or all other stakeholders?
Both, because it's two sides. It's like communication is what you deliver and what's received.
Correct.
So we'd want, and you would have 21 months of your experience to tell us what you think, you know, the users and the procurers would need to do in order to help themselves and in order to help the process. So it's both sides, based on your experience.
Very well.
Thank
because
you.
we have identified that in many instances, we don't have the power to make the certain changes, but we have accepted our role as a strong advocate for the change. So therefore, we will include those.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Chairman,
Before we go to Madam, Ms. Nasrimedial, there are other countries in the Caribbean who are ahead of you, yes? Tell me, are you in discussion with them to learn how they have been able to maneuver and how they've managed the process so that you can learn from their mistakes? Have you done that at all, or is there a plan to do so?
Madam Chair, yes, indeed, we have. We have been collaborating, not just in the Caribbean, but in the wider hemisphere, through the OAS group of countries, as well as through, linkages that have been made by the Inter-American Development Bank and the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. Last year, we hosted a roundtable discussion in which we had stakeholders from across the region, hemisphere, I should say, and that was the intent, about learning from, what other countries have experienced. There is no country in the Caribbean that has exactly a framework like ours. All right, so that, so we cannot replicate exactly, but yes, that being said, there are lessons to be learned in this exchange.
Thank you. Ms. Nasrimedial?
Chairman, through you, I just want to inquire about what the regulator would have indicated, and it's something that I think we've all gotten reports about, is the stifling, I think that was the word that you used, that has taken place since full procurement with respect to doing business. And we all acknowledge there's a need to balance compliance with the ease of doing business. The Public Procurement Act, however, was passed in 2015. And I'm hearing about the need for maybe organizational restructuring, recruitment of professionals, building capacity. But I'm hearing about the commencement of training last week. So we are 10 years on. And I'm just wondering, when we had full procurement of this act, was there not two things? Since the law was passed, has no one in the public service been tasked with being the change leader to ensure, prior to proclamation, full proclamation, that the necessary things were put in place because it was meant to be a major paradigm shift. So firstly, who was supposed to be, or ought to have been, if anyone, championing the paradigm shift that the Act was meant to create within the public service? And secondly, was an assessment of the state of readiness of the public service, whether it is the ministries, departments, or the state enterprises. Was this not done prior to full proclamation taking place? Perhaps somebody from the Ministry of Finance would be able to answer that question. So those are the two questions I just want to find out, because I'm a bit concerned that 10 years after a law has been passed, what we've seen in your submission and what we have been told is that we now have arrived at a place where we need to, and of course there would always be needs to revise and look back, but we are in a place where, as you use the word, business and the business of the state could be stifled by regulations and the inability of ministries and so on to do what is necessary.
Thank you, Member. Through you, Chair, prior to proclamation, the Ministry of Finance had been... Okay, sorry. Sure. Okay, hearing me better now? Okay. What I started to say was that prior to proclamation, the Ministry of Finance had rolled out a series of training, sensitization, through a consultant who had been on board through the UNDP. All right? Those were in the years 2017. We had various seminars, sensitization of various aspects of procurement, records management, the methods, all aspects of procurement throughout ministries and departments. Since proclamation on May the 9th, there was a seminar that was hosted in Diplomatic Center. This was throughout PSs were invited and ministers. We started at that level. Subsequently, in June, we had sensitization again with the accounting officers of public bodies. And again, later that month, in June 2023, we had sensitization with state-controlled enterprises. So the Ministry of Finance started the ball rolling prior to proclamation and since proclamation. And Chairman and her staff have rolled out a series, and I think she will detail all that has been done since then.
You don't think that starting sensitization for ministers, PSs, and accounting officers just after a proclamation is a little bit late, having regard to the fact that we've passed this law since 2015? I know you mentioned you did some before, but clearly what is being reported and the fact that you are now, the OPR has taken up the challenge of doing training. You said you had a consultant on board since 2017, but was the training effective? Has anyone looked at whether or not that training or whatever had been done through the consultant was sufficient? If we are still at a stage now where we feel that the system isn't working and that you have almost a standstill in terms of procurement at the time of proclamation that we're still trying to work out.
Through you, Chair. Remember the training that was being rolled out over a period of time, because it was not just one session. Various officers, permanent secretaries, functionaries in ministries and departments did attend. What happened during the course of time, as happens normally in the public service, there has been a turnover of staff. So staff who would have been earmarked by their permanent secretaries and heads of department to attend those sessions, have the learnings, roll it out throughout their ministries and departments. Many of them moved on to various other fields within the public service or out of the public service. And that training was based on, at the time, certain draft manuals that were not yet approved. Okay? Those manuals had to be approved by the regulator, who was not yet on board. All right? So we were training based on the general principles. Several ministries and departments, several members. And so there was ongoing work being done.
Well, Chairman, that being said, let me ask this question as it relates to recruitment. Your written submissions cites the audit and investigation department as one of the internal challenges faced by the OPR, and states that to mitigate these constraints being faced by the department, the OPR has issued a call for experts as provided for in the Act, yes? What is the status of the call for these experts? Have they been recruited?
Through you, Chair. No, we have the list, and we are going through the list to assess the qualifications in particular areas. But the call for experts was in highly specialized areas. That's one thing. And they will be required as we need them in terms of investigations in particular, but in other areas. But the OPR in itself went into full proclamation without an organizational structure that allowed it to operationalize all elements of the Act and our functions under the Act. So we went in, we do not have the adequate staff, but let me say but we have been doing our work. We have adopted strategies that allows us to meet our commitments in reporting, to continue our oversight, to effectively manage our redress mechanisms. So notwithstanding we have had shortfalls, we have a shortfall in the staffing. We have been doing what is necessary to be done.
What is the full complement that is required, and what percentage are you as it relates to full complement?
Okay, so we are now having looked at the system for 21 months and getting a good feel of really how we should form ourselves. We currently have a staffing of 78, of which 58 are filled positions. The early estimates is that we would need to, at a minimum, double that staff.
Understood. And what is the time frame that you have relative to getting that in place?
This year, member.
Chairman, one more question on this rounds, please. In your written submission, you cite the need for support of auxiliary entities as one of the external challenges faced by the OPR, and state that to improve the investigative functions, the OPR is in the process of building out mechanisms for collaboration with law enforcement and other key stakeholders. This process is still at the fundamental level. Can you, at the foundational level, could you say to the listening public, how far gone are you in the process of having this collaborative effort with the law enforcement bodies?
Thank you, member. The channels of communication are open now with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. We have also engaged with the Director of Public Prosecution's Office. We have already started a collaboration with some divisions of the TTPS. But to effectively move ahead, we have identified the need to have a memorandum of agreement with the TTPS, with the DPP's office, and as required, Registrar General's office. And we are also looking at the Auditor General's office as well.
And what is the time frame in having at least a draft? What is the time frame?
Remember, our target is to have all those agreements in place before the end of this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I just want to go back to a question about the state of readiness, because in your submission, this is a submission from the Ministry of Finance, sorry, not Procurement Regulator. You stated that following the proclamation of the Act, Central Audit Committee conduct of audits evaluated 5 state agencies in terms of their readiness for compliance, and you stated that the remaining state agencies were not included in the assessment due to the defined scope of the audit. So is it that, we want to get some more information about this audit? What were the agencies that were evaluated, and why only 5? What was the criteria of the audit? And if you have any plans to further audit the state of readiness in terms of state agencies?
Member, through There are plans to do further audits. The unit in the Ministry of Finance has drafted a procedural manual that will be rolled out based on the current legislative framework and the guidelines. So yes, there are plans to do further audits, but they must be in compliance with the Act. But also we have to be careful to not to usurp the authority of the Office of Regulation in doing that. So that has to be worked out very carefully.
To reach a time frame that you anticipate that further audits could be done, and could you also indicate, I was asking about the 5 agencies that were in fact evaluated. Do you have that information?
The time frame and the further audits, we will have to get back to you on that because the work program has just been rolled out by the unit for the calendar year.
5 agencies already evaluated.
Can get back to you on that.
On your written submission, when you talk about the Audit and Investigation Department, you talk, about procurement compliance and monitoring as one of the internal challenges faced by the OPR, and you say that inter-organizational, cross-functional teams have been convened as an interim measure for such purpose. Could you tell us the current composition or constitution of those teams?
Thank you, Chair. So as I said, the UPR has about 58 members of staff. There are 11 divisions in the UPR. So you can see the organization is very flat. The Audit and Investigations unit, we have at this point in time 2 senior auditors in addition to the head, and we have 4 investigators. Now, the plan at a minimum over the next couple of months, the plan is to bring on 4 more officers. I should also let the committee know that we have gone out several times to recruit investigators and auditors, and there are not many out there. We have found that in order to get them, more than likely you have to encourage them to come from places that they now work in law enforcement. Okay, so the intent is what we did in the OPR, given the limited staff, given the extent of the challenge that we were seeing out there, we decided, okay, we would use the numbers that we have now to effectively do what we had to do. So you would find, like, in preparing our annual report, we pulled persons even from our audit and investigation. My senior auditor, who is behind me, led that process, the data analytics to produce that report. We brought people from the policy and capacity development units of the OPR as well as legal. So it was a whole of office approach because we had no choice. We didn't have the numbers.
You have the finance or the wherewithal to actually entice the qualified people that you need into your employ so that they would be willing to leave their the present employment.
Yeah. Funding, Chairman. Funding has not been an issue really for the OPR quite yet. This year we got an increase in the allocation of $15 million, which will allow us to ramp up our staff to the doubling that I spoke about in this initial instance. In terms of the remuneration package, the OPR had gone through an exercise, a compensation review with Pricewaterhouse a few years back So the established remuneration packages are quite competitive at this point in time.
That's not a story that we normally hear here, so that we don't know who, people may be calling you to find out what is the reason for your success. But I mean, it points to government being very serious in this area, I would say. Mr.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a follow-up to the last question you answered. If you are seeking to double your staff by the end of this year, but you shared with us that you are struggling to get to lure investigators and auditors to OPR, how do you intend to double, or where do you intend to get the auditors and the investigators from to assist with your,
Thank you, Member. Through you, Chair. So the doubling is across the OPR, right? Where do we intend to get them? From where they are operating now within Trinidad and Tobago, to entice them across, right? But the doubling, the fact is the OPR does not have a compliance and monitoring department. We need to immediately set that up and devise our strategy for monitoring compliance. We also need to build out a data analytics team, a very strong data analytics team, and to ensure that we use technology in how we analyze data. We also need to have a dedicated group of people dealing with stakeholder engagement. So that is where you are going to see the numbers, because they will be entirely new divisions to be brought on. So we are in an organizational restructuring exercise, and that will feed into our recruitment strategy.
The 100, you spoke about the training of 125 officers from within ministries. Those were officers who were already identified as procurement officers?
Well, let me respond by saying those are the officers that do the procurement. Yeah, because, there is no title as procurement officer per se. The Act requires public bodies to name
someone.
Name someone. So that's how we have the terminology, a named procurement officer. So this training, and I also want to respond to the earlier question on why we know training. Training has always been happening, even by the OPR. The OPR has a learning management system as well. The challenge that you had, I think, in where we are now, is that the level at which the training was pitched assumed a basic foundational knowledge of what procurement is, right? And that has turned out to be not the case. Hence the reason why, having seen the system in operation for 21 months, and the kinds of queries and questions that we are asked, the kind of data that are submitted to us, we recognized that there are basics that are missing. There are some people who don't understand what is a project even. Because procurement in the past, the larger scale procurements was undertaken by the Central Tenders Board. So at the ministries, it was more like purchasing items, right? And that continues to be what people know, right? So they get 3 quotes, and then they decide which is the cheapest. And that is not always value for money, right? So we went back to basics. So we engaged with the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, CIPS, and we said to CIPS, we want to do a training at the basic level, but we want to incorporate the elements of our legislative framework in that training so that, the officers, when they come out, will not just have general procurement knowledge, but will then understand the Act and the regulatory framework, right? So that is what we did. And when they get their certificate, there's an exam they have to do. When they get it, it will allow them to move on to the professional level 4 of SIPs. So we are really at basic level now. But at the same time, the OPR has the learning management system that procurement officers, the named procurement officers in particular, are the ones who we give the license to go in and do the various modules.
So as part of your roadmap that you committed to a 6 weeks production, or to produce within 6 weeks, would part of that zeroing on a more in-depth training for public officers who would be identified as procurement officers? And if I'm to slip in this, I have no qualms in sharing my Tobago-ness. So of the 125 officers that embarked on that training, could you share if any of those 125 came from within the public sector in Tobago?
Remember, we always include Tobago in any endeavor, so yes. Yes.
And with the roadmap that you're seeking to produce within, would training be a significant part of that? Because from what you are sharing, I get your enthusiasm, and I want to compliment you on speaking very positively towards the work of the OPR. I think training is one of the areas that we're lacking within the system, with the understanding of what procurement is and that kind of thing. So I'm hoping that training will be a critical part in that roadmap on the way forward.
Absolutely, member. It is the foundation for really moving forward. But training, if I would have the opportunity to add, training must also be accompanied by systems change. It's very, very important, because you could train people and then you send them back into the system of how they do procurement, and you will have no benefit, and they become frustrated, right?
Tell me, have you collaborated with the Public Service Academy of the Ministry of Public Administration to assist with training of public officers?
We have had in the past interactions with the Public Service Academy and with the Ministry of Public Administration. The challenge that we face, Chairman and members, is the fact that we don't have the staff to do the training ourselves, and that's what they're looking for, right? We can help certainly in establishing the content and the program, and we have established training standards and competency levels at different levels of procurement. So we have done that work. But no, we have not done it within recent times because of that deficit in our own staffing. And therefore, our preference is that we facilitate the training through getting persons who have the time, who can, impart the proper training, taking into consideration our own legislative framework. But yes, it is something that even with the University of the West Indies and the Ministry of Public Administration's exercise now to do training across the board, I have spoken to them and said procurement must be a fundamental element of this training program. So we are working on all fronts, but we are not waiting. We are doing what we can indeed do, because we are seeing the pain that is being felt out there.
Your written submission cites refinement of standard operating procedures and manuals as one of the strategies employed by you to improve the oversight and investigative capabilities. As of January 15, 2025, your website listed over 50 general guidelines, procedural forms, standard bidding documents, and model contract on its website. What has been the feedback, if any, from stakeholders regarding the volume of documentation which public bodies are expected to consult for guidance regarding the PPDPP Act? Recalling the institutional capacity constraints of public bodies noted by the OPR earlier in the submission, is there possibilities that public bodies are being overwhelmed by the volume of documents we consulted, several of which were revised or otherwise updated? To what extent is the new public procurement regime enhancing or hindering public sector efficiency and effectiveness? You know, human being, when you see a lot of paper, you run. Yes? You get frightened.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. In fact, when I went to the OPR, I myself, when I saw the amount of documentation, so we have tried to introduce some measures, some roadmaps to how to use the documents. And in fact, we are going to be rationalizing those 50 that you spoke about into one manual that will guide public bodies. In the beginning, when, before full proclamation, when I myself asked, why do we have so much? It's because the intent then was to be as prescriptive as possible. That, I think, ran away from us a bit, and we maybe got too prescriptive. And yes, it is a challenge, for public bodies. I will admit it, yes. So we are seeking to rationalize that and bring it under a streamlined, one document that they can go to and get the information that they want. But you have to balance that with the fact, too, Chairman and members, that a lot of people don't want to read and engage with the information. I mean, even on the LMS system, the license, a lot of them don't attend the training, don't complete the training. But the only way we are all going to learn the system is if we take the time to understand it, because it is so fundamentally different. So, we need to balance it. We get on a daily basis queries. Since full proclamation, it has nearly been about 7,000 help desk website queries that we have been dealing with. We get requests for meetings and presentations. People like to come to the presentations because then we are able to translate it out of all the information into something that is perhaps better received. We have the walk-in facility, people coming. But yet we still get queries. People ask us very specific things of how to do their procurement. But we need to guard our independence, as I said in the beginning, because we may be called upon to adjudicate on a matter. So we do not give specific procurement advice. To assist with that, the OPR plans to introduce this year, we will bring together a group of consultants, people who are procurement professionals, and send them out into various public bodies that we are seeing that are most challenged, and so that they can work with them in a hands-on way in understanding processes and methodologies in doing the procurement. So they need that on-the-job coaching. So in addition to all the other training we're doing, we understand there's a need for this as well.
I must say I find refreshing your understanding of the challenges faced by the members of the public and your readiness to deal with it. So you have stated, you talked about the activation of the whistleblowing mechanism as one of the strategies to improve oversight and investigative capabilities. And in this connection, it was stated that to ensure widespread awareness and accessibility, the OPR launched public information campaigns highlighting the platform's purpose and benefit. Could you see the level of response to these campaigns?
Thank you,
Is it
Chair.
ongoing?
It is, and I will ask the Chief Operations Officer to speak to the whistleblowing platform and the activity that we have seen there.
Okay. Good morning again, and through you, Chair. So far, we have had 87 reports through that platform, right? We have dealt with 77 of those. Of the 10 that have remained, 2 is just about finalized, and the others are still under investigation, right? So far the responses from it has been, very heartening, right? So, so far so good with it.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. Now, I was very happy when the Office of Procurement Regulator would have sent to the Parliament your annual report on the activities and the challenges that the Office has faced and some of the successes, in fact, that the Office have been able to achieve with respect to the full proclamation of this remarkable and landmark piece of legislation in Trinidad and Tobago. And I heard the Office, the regulator, indicate the challenges because there's always a cultural shift or change when you have such a shift in the normal working arrangements that persons are accustomed to. And therefore, through the public procurement legislation, various public bodies now had to change their structural arrangements. And in the report, you also indicated the level of compliance by some of these public bodies, and you gave some statistics. Based on those statistics that were given, from since that report to now, has there been any other substantial compliance by any public body to bring themselves up to speed with what is required under the Act, because you are all the enforcers of the Act also?
Yeah, thank you, Member. We have seen some movement in terms of compliance, but I don't want to exaggerate that movement at all. It is not significant, right? I will ask my senior auditor to speak a little bit about what she's seeing in compliance from the reporting perspective in particular, because that is where the data comes through to us as to how efficiently the process is working and if it's being effective. So I'll ask Ms. Ellis.
Thank you and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to share what we've been seeing at the OPR and what we've been experiencing. So just to put the information that we're presenting to you in context, over the first 12 months post-proclamation, so that would have been from April 26th to April 26th or 25th of the following year, being 2024, we would have identified 244 public bodies under the remit of the OPR for reporting purposes. Initially, what we would have seen, and based on the report, I'm hoping most of you would have seen the data included within the report, a number of the challenges that would have already been identified this morning have impacted how public bodies would have interacted, firstly with the OPR, as well as how they would have proceeded in terms of reaching out to the OPR to either get assistance. So we had those who came forward looking for help and those who regressed, because as we could appreciate, this change is a big change within our landscape. And so there are public bodies who have felt very, very overwhelmed. They've become defeated in some instances in trying to just grapple with the legislation, the reporting deadlines, etc. And we also found that there were persons who would have naturally understood the task that they had to take on and really tried to push through, not taking away from the challenges that are within the system. And in some instances, they were successful. In some instances, mistakes would have been made. All right, so just going into the figures, because we want to put that in the context that this is a wider change. A lot of systems were not in place for reporting specifically within many of the ministries, as would have been alluded to already by Ms. Khan. Structures were not put in place to have effective, to tell the whole procurement story. We look at procurement from a cycle, so there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the Act envisioned that public bodies would be able to tell their whole procurement story. From the beginning, planning stage, identifying the need, all the way up to contract closeout. Systems are not in place to facilitate that. So from a reporting standpoint, a lot of public bodies, in addition to the issues of staff turnover, in addition to the issues of just being new, it was upon proclamation a lot of these public bodies actually got named procurement officers, or persons would have been named. So we either had new persons being hired to the organization, not having a history of the organization culture, not understanding their procurement practices, etc. But you also had persons who were just delegated the function, who never had to carry out procurement before. We introduced the Act as well as the regulations and the guidelines, introduced a whole lot of new terms. So there was jargon confusion. It introduced a whole lot of new processes, so that you found that a lot of persons, I often say, so let me just digress so that you all get the point I'm about to make. Everyone in Trinidad and Tobago does procurement. From at a very basic level, a primary school student goes into a cafeteria and has to make a decision of what to buy with whatever funds they have. So everybody can purchase something. What we're asking public bodies to do, and what the Act requires, is that there is an elevation now from not just purchasing, but strategically actually acquiring goods and services and works for the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, being able to achieve one of those key objects of the Act, value for money. And so without having those structures in place, and I really want to kind of target the systems and the structures, the absence of that created a reporting problem. So you had a number of NPOs who would have said to us initially, and that is still the case in some entities, they would have indicated to the OPR, okay, it's not that we don't have the information, we can't piece it together. Because one department, because of the system we had before, and the mistrust in that system, and we are all aware of some of the institutional issues that procurement has had in the public service, they would have split up things in a way to prevent the left hand knowing what the right hand was doing. And now we trusted upon them a system that asks you to see the whole picture. And so what happened is that there were pieces of information in different buckets lying in different places. The IT structures didn't allow for certain things to talk to one another. And so pulling that information and being able to report it to us initially in those first few months was difficult. A lot of work went into just explaining to them what we need and how you can find it, and alternative sources of data that may be able to guide them to be able to report a little bit more effectively to us. What we saw over time is an increase in the reporting. The quality of data is still poor, but we are getting buy-in. So we've moved from, at the end of March, we would have had 160 public bodies. We are now at 180 public bodies at the end of Q4 who would have at least made one submission. They would have at least at one point in time submitted some type of reporting information on their contracts, their awards, variations, unfulfilled, as well as payment progress. And for us, that's a big leap, considering that a lot of the systems have not changed. I really want to say kudos to the public officers who are out there who are really trying with what they have, because it does not allow for many of them to produce what the Act is asking them to. And so that system change is necessary to be able to effect what we're asking of public bodies. Yes?
For the purposes of the listening public also, this is important to them. One of the most basic requirements under this piece of legislation is for a public body to name a procurement officer. That's one of the most basic requirements. Have a procurement officer in place and have the committee installed. Can you tell me, out of all of the public bodies, the total number of public bodies, how many are still without a named procurement officer?
All right. At this junction, I wouldn't be able to give you an exact. We have refined the figures recently for the new report that's coming, so I wouldn't be able to give you an exact, but we do know that at the end of, because it's mandatory as part of the Act, to have that access to the depository, to be able to see the suppliers and contractors who are registered, you actually have to have a named procurement officer. So by compliance, most entities at the end of April, I think we had about 80-something%, 86, right? 86% of all of the public bodies would have identified. That number has grown, so we're getting closer to a place of full compliance. I don't want to give you an exact percentage without and give you misinformation, but it has increased from that 86% since then.
My view is that that's still unacceptable, simply because we have this act proclaimed since 2023. The simplest thing you can do is name a procurement officer, so that that is a conduit between the public body and the OPR. And that should have been done almost immediately after or before proclamation, have that person in place.
And we agree with you. We completely agree. However, I want us to put that in the context as well, that there are many entities who have not been able to either hire a named procurement officer. While they've named the persons, you've had persons who've also resisted, because the Act doesn't say it has to be somebody with procurement experience. We've had entities where they've identified a person, the person has looked at the information and said, I cannot do this function. And some of them, they just move to another ministry, they move somewhere else. So while it is an easy thing to do, to say, just name someone, that's someone under the law is going to be held accountable. That someone is the person who's going to be fined. That someone is the one who is going to be responsible for all of the reporting, all of the compliance within that organization. So while, yes, we understand and we appreciate the point of it should be at 100. We believe that it should be at 100. There are those nuances that would prevent it from arriving at 100 in some entities. And I see the regulator may also want to add to that. Thank you.
Yes, through you, Chair. There's a high turnover of NPOs. You have them, because, there is a dearth of people in terms of procurement knowledge, basic knowledge in the country to begin with. And those that are there are just moving around to who is going to pay them, the higher remuneration. So they move fairly quickly. And then those that are below them, who perhaps would have been trained with them, they are very reluctant to take on the responsibility. Because when they look at the penalties and the fines that could be imposed on a named procurement officer, a lot of them have said to us they do not want to be part of that. So we really need to, lift the level of procurement professionals in the country. We need to make it a profession. We need to put, like how in the past project managers emerged as someone, as people who are professionals. We need to do that. We need to put them in a structured way where they can't be moved every other week, right? And we need to pay them well.
So you read my mind. So maybe it might be a recommendation of this committee that policy be taken that the government, through the Ministry of Education or Public Administration, have courses or training programs to better skill these people, so that when they go into this position, that they stay, they know exactly what to do, and they have confidence to guide the public body in terms of the method of procurement. And I don't know if you have this information with you, but you could probably share it after in writing. Can you give us a category of those public bodies that are struggling to name these NPOs, so that we could probably look at that in perspective with the data? I also have another point I want to raise, and I like this in the report. There's a name and shame section, and that is good, because I'm looking at the report right now, and it talks about the quarterly contract reporting history by public body groupings. Simply means report your contract to the OPR when you award contracts. And I'm just looking at the three main ministries that are not compliant in any of the quarters: Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Ministry of National Security, which has one of the largest budgets that is appropriated, Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts. The Ministry of Energy is also in breach. I see the Ministry of Attorney General. And this raises concern in my mind that you are telling me as the OPR that these bodies that are allocated billions of dollars are not reporting their contracts for any of the period. What have you done so far to ensure some level of compliance with this?
Thank you, Member. Through you, Chair. It is also a concern for the OPR. It's a huge concern for the OPR. We have been able to get the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs and the Ministry of Tourism to report. Unfortunately, we have not gotten the Ministry of National Security to report. What have we done? So, we have given a number of directives. We have met with the ministry. We have given the opportunity to submit the reports, notwithstanding it would not have been within the statutory timeline. That has not, the response has still been that no response. Let me just say that, right? In instances where we did get a report, it was grossly inadequate. Okay? So the OPR, we have taken a stance where we understand the challenges on the ground and we want to be accommodative, but we will not accommodate people breaking the law, right? We will not do that. We hold our independence, is something that we guard, that we will say it as it is. But at the same time, we will work to improve the system because we do not want to be a regulatory body that is only reporting, non-compliance. We need to do something about it because we are building a regulatory framework that is intended to serve this country for decades to come. So at this stage, we are going to utilize the other powers that we have to deal with those public bodies that are not compliant and who we have given ample opportunity to come on board.
Madam Regulator, I just want to commend Madam Regulator on your stance this morning for the non-tolerance of these public bodies that are not compliant with the law. I commend you this morning for that.
Now, you spoke about the Ministry of National Security, which is multifaceted. Do you have a sense that there is a particular aspect of the ministry that is causing the problem, or is it that all parts of the various parts of the ministry, are problematic? Because you have so many different entities which comprise that particular ministry.
It is about 20 odd, maybe a little more. It's in the vicinity of that number. Madam Chair, I really cannot see. We were given the assurance that they are compiling the information, but I really cannot see if there is any that is problematic. What we were told initially was that all of them fell under the ministry and the ministry would report. And then subsequently, we were told that some of them will be excised out, like the Tobago Police Service, will be taken out and dealt with, and they will report on their own procurements. So they will be treated as a public body in their own right, because you could be a department and also be a public body, right? It depends on how the accounting officer sees it, right? So, but I really cannot say, because we haven't had discussions with the individuals in the room, you know, the individual divisions and agencies. Yeah.
And if, you know, the fire service can say everything is all right with their contracts, and the police can't say that, you know, and the Coast Guard may have, you know, so we wouldn't like just one entity keeping back the entire thing. All right. We'll try, keep trying. There's hope at the end of the day.
Madam, may I? I just want to also, because this issue with national security, we often have a lot of issues with getting information out of them with respect to procurement of goods and services. I think there's an issue with some ladders, some wooden ladders that had to be investigated also. I don't know if that falls under the purview of your office, but I know that was reported widely. There's another issue that you have raised from your submissions to us, and I find it very concerning too, because the first time I spotted it again was when I read that annual report. So when you send it, I'm probably the first parliamentarian who reads that report, because it gives us an indication of where monies are going. And one of the issues you raised was the excessive use of non-competitive procurement procedures, which simply means sole select, what it was termed under the old Central Tenders Board. And one of the comments in that report was this, and it had me very concerned. Some of the practices observed included the inappropriate and unjustifiable use of limited and non-competitive procurement methods. So just correct me if I'm wrong here. A public body goes out for tender, they decide to go sole select or non-competitive bidding, non-competitive method, They will now have to justify why I am going there. It's either something that is not readily available, it's something that is specialized, it's not for any run-of-the-mill material. For example, you have to procure chairs or tables. There are several providers for that. If it's something specialized, you can justify in that manner. When these public bodies are procuring in such a manner, because most, based on your numbers here, most of the contracts awarded are actually being done by non-competitive procurement. What is the OPR's position first when a public body fails to justify or uses inappropriate justifications for the use of non-competitive procurement methods?
To you, Chair, very concerning member, because the Act speaks to fairness and equity. But it also speaks to efficiency as well, and getting value for money. What we continue to see is a sizable amount of transactions that are using that methodology. It really speaks to the history, you know, what people were accustomed doing. Remember, they were accustomed just purchasing. And so if they have to go and purchase a pack of pens this week, they will go and procure that. Next week or next month, they have to do pens again. They will go and procure another set. So you have multiple transactions for very low risk, low value items, when in fact you can indeed establish framework agreements and do it properly through a method, right? And invite people to bid and based, but it really requires people to plan and think about what they're doing for the year with the monies that they have, right? That is not something that is happening, right? In addition, let me also take the opportunity. The OPR is starting to talk a lot about passive waste, where we don't identify properly what is the need we are trying to fill. And therefore, oftentimes, we end up going through the procurement process, and there's an issue at the end. So planning is very, very important. The annual schedule of planned procurement activities is intended to, push people along in that direction. And it is something that must be linked with their budgeting process. Procurement is an integral part of financial management. And we need to create that nexus. So that is another area that the OPR will be working with the Ministry of Finance on. How do we create that nexus? Because you would find that people tend to listen more to the Ministry of Finance because that is where they get their money. And money talks kind of thing, right? But it's one ecosystem that we really need to bring together. There's some, when you talk to procurement officers, well, it's the easiest thing for them to do. Let me go with who we are accustomed using, right? And another area I want to highlight to the committee is the issue of record keeping on procurements. The Act requires you to maintain a file, a procurement file, right? Even if you are taking a quote over the phone, you're supposed to document it, right? That is a huge, huge deficiency that we are seeing. Files are all over the place. And there are files that we have seen that do not follow proper process. Do you identify your need? Have you done your proper specifications? Have you done your market analysis? Have you gotten your estimates? Even for low risk, low value procurements, we need to make that the practice in every single procurement.
Madam Regulator, do you have a list of those public bodies that in rank that tend to go for this non-competitive procurement method, and can you provide that with us? Who is the number one? Which is the number one public body that goes there?
I will ask Ms. Ellis. I cannot recall at this time.
Sure.
Are you able to?
Hi, thank you again for giving us an opportunity to respond. So in terms of the ranking, who would have the most, we can provide that information to you.
Thank you.
But just to add to what was asked by you, member, when we looked at initially, so we were grateful that you read the report, and when we looked at that information up to that junction, we had some suspicions about what may have been happening within the system, but we needed more data to be able to determine whether or not those assumptions were actually true. What the information told us, yes, it's excessive, but when we looked at that ratio of purchase orders to contracts that were being awarded over that first 12-month period, realized that there was an alarming size of purchase orders inside of there. Part of that would have also fostered, it went into strengthening our push for the simplified regulations. And it gave us an ability to now analyze the transactions that were happening, contracts and POs being awarded under $1 million, because that's where we saw that type of activity happening. And so in quarter 3 and 4, which would be presented in the upcoming report, we have that breakdown of what happened in terms of the micro. And that information on the micro kind of gave us insight, further insight, that now allows us to probably provide you with some further reasons or what we've observed. So in the first instance, exactly what Ms. Khan would have mentioned, planning and how we do procurement has not been re-rationalized by a lot of public bodies, so we're still purchasing versus strategically procuring items. We would have noticed when we looked at, and we specifically have a different reporting template for micros, everything that's under 75,000, that information caused our numbers to move exactly where we expected them to. most of those transactions were happening at that 75,000 and below threshold. And it's significant. Just to give you an example, we had in quarter 4, 37,430 purchase order, or it could be contracts and POs. We're hoping that they're not contracts, but it could be a combination of contracts and POs that happen under that $75,000 bucket, right? Being reported, and this is 1 quarter, 3 months. In some organizations, they would have had in excess in that 3 months of more than 2,000 transactions happening at that level, that dollar, that number, volume. So you're having a lot of transactions, repeated transactions that's happening, issuing of POs because we're buying piecemeal. We're not rethinking how we procure stuff. And so that is what is bulking up. And of course, if you're going to buy stationery, photocopying every other week, it's going to increase your number of transactions, alarmingly, as well as it's going to produce that type of sway within our statistics. And that's why, while we pointed it out in the first report, we needed more information to be able. And so we are really grateful that we had the insight of the simplified. We are now seeing where those figures reside. Right. And just to give you an idea of the category, so we understand that it's really purchasing that's happening and not true procurement. And we want to get public bodies to the place of procurement. So you're seeing it at the level of fuel and lubricants, because these are the categories that are within the line items within the budget, right? So fuel and lubricants, drugs, food at institutions, in some instances, maintenance of vehicles, promotion, publication, and printing. That's where a bulk of those activities are happening within the single source, sole source, and non-competitive. A lot of it is bulked inside of there. So it's routine transactions that's not being taught out, and it's creating bulk. And so for a reporting standpoint, just imagine you have to go and put in for OPR, 2,000 and something like that. And that's only on the micro. That's not in small scale. That is not over 1 million. So any one entity, this entity in particular, and the RHAs in particular, they have volumes of transactions. So just try reporting over 60,000 transactions in a quarter to the OPR and getting it done on time with all of the columns completed and accurately, because it's a manual entry. Yeah. So those are the types of challenges that are within the system.
Do you see there's a loophole being exploited?
All right. So in some instances, we need to probe that a little bit further. The Act does speak to splitting, and it could be that that is what is happening. But now that we have the information, again, we need to build out, because we don't want to jump. We could have jumped at that junction at the end of April and say, well, you know, they're just not doing what they're supposed to do. But because we understand where the capacity level is at, we think if we can fix that a little bit, as well as go in and do the audits, look at what is being spent at that level to see whether or not our suspicions of splitting is correct, or if it's just passive waste. So it's a lot of activity happening at a very exponential cost for the enterprise, but to really procure things that could probably be done via different method and medium and effectively.
Tobago has been waiting in the wings, so let me hear from him.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, thank you so much to the participants for the frankness in which you've responded to our questions. Well, let me ask this. Do you think that people, and that would be the bodies and or the entities that are engaged with procurement that falls under the OPR, is scared of the procurement regulator and or the regulations?
Through you, Chair, yes. I think that they're scared of the penalties and the fines, because most of it is a fine and a jail term, right? It's not all. I think that there is a fear of the unknown. So I think that is part of it, for sure. There are procurement officers who have said that to us directly. You know, I don't want to get into that business at all, you know. I'm not being paid enough to be subject to that. So yes, member, I believe that that has its influence as well.
We just heard a bit about significant non-competitive processes being done. Is it your view or the view of the OPR that that non-competitive things like sole source and value for money are mutually exclusive?
Member, it depends on the procurement. I don't think you can generalize on that. There are instances where you get value for money by going through a sole source process. The Act is, actually the regulations state in which instances you can utilize the non-competitive methods, particularly the sole and the single sourcing, because it allows for greater efficiency as well. It may be that the market is limited. Maybe it is a continuation of a procurement done, a good or service or works undertaken previously, so that the particular supplier or contractor has prior knowledge. So each instance is different. But in the instance where we are seeing such a preponderance of non-competitive methods, it is a cause for concern. Because it seems to me to be the default mechanism, the default method when open bidding, and there are times in which open bidding may not be the most efficient and in terms of value for money. It depends on what you are procuring. But so it would be difficult to generalize.
Are stipulations that deal with acceptance of the lowest price bidder part of the regulations that you promote? Meaning, when people do their evaluations and they follow the rules and they've submitted their pieces, that they are bound to accept the lowest price.
I would say no, and pass you on to my policy officer, and she will share a bit more.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Good afternoon. So with respect to the lowest priced bids being acceptable, this is something you would determine in your procurement strategy. When you, at the outset, depending on the risk, the nature of what you're procuring, the availability of supply, you will the complexity of what you are buying, you will determine what your outcome will be. And sometimes the lowest price is not always the way to go, because you would want, in some circumstances, to prioritize the quality of something over the lowest price. But this needs to be stated at the onset in your procurement strategy development. Then when you determine what your solicitation document is going to be, you build out that in your solicitation document, and you tell your bidders at that point what it is you'll be evaluating them on. And you can use different selection methods at that point, and you state it there, and you build your evaluation criteria around that. So once you do that, there's fairness and transparency in your process, and bidders know what they are focusing their bids on. Are they just going to give you a basic something and a low price to win the bid, or are they going to give you a high quality something because they know precisely what the public body is looking for? So your selection method starts all the way back in your procurement planning, and it's translated throughout your solicitation document and evaluation process.
Chair, through you again, and I'm so happy to hear that, because in my conversations with a number of people, the emphasis that they put everything on is on the final price. And I counter that by simply saying, I used to travel a lot on aircraft, and it would be very concerning to me that the aircraft that I was traveling on, the wings were built by the person who provided the lowest cost. So you will understand why I raise things like that. Again, to you, Chair, the other issue I want to raise pertains to procurement in the security space. I have, well, let me not say it that way. It is interesting that security procurement, and if I be specific in this case in some of the procurements that we have to do at my ministry, cybersecurity procurement. I have long argued that it is impossible and foolhardy to do security level procurement through the traditional methods that we have, which would include open tendering and so on. Invariably, you place yourself at a significant risk. What is the OPR's view on things of that nature?
For us, that is quite acceptable. It depends on, of course, as you're saying, security. The Act speaks to, where we are procuring items that may have some security considerations, right? We always tell people, you have to document what it is you are procuring and what is your strategy. If it is that you have identified risks associated, by all means, you need to document it and let your procurement file justify why you have gone limited or non-competitive bidding. But it is something that is quite acceptable once it is justified properly. And it is not something that should be everything that is tangential to that security procurement, security-related procurement, right? It has to be those goods, works, and services that themselves a risk is associated with that and going out to open bidding. So your file must reflect that, and it requires the procurement officers to really detail all of that in the file and justify it.
So this just goes back to where you started at the beginning, the level of sophistication to which these officers have to operate and understand. And if they can't do that, then you understand the risks that we open to the entire country. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the issue of the reporting, and as much as the Act has all its challenges and the system is fraught with its own issues, I think what we're getting from this inquiry is that there is benefit, significant benefit to the Act in operation as we seek to evolve as a society and to a more transparent society. But the question I want to ask is, how do you move, as the OPR, how do you move from the report to actual system change, actual change? How does that report then move? How does it make the system better? What powers do you have? What influence do you have as the OPR? So when you see these concerns, how do you move it from just a report that we could read to something actionable?
Thank you, Member, and through you, Chair. The OPR has started up several different personas, let me see. There are instances, and as I said previously, there are instances in which we have to advocate for the change and to be a strong voice for the change. And our collaboration with the Ministry of Finance in particular has been extremely fruitful. We have done that collaboration in terms of making the system simpler with the depository. There are other instances in which the change has to reside with us, the changes that we make in the systems. I spoke about the changes that we are making on the depository, for one, which is within our control once the regulations are in effect. In addition, we have the responsibility for doing the handbooks and guidelines, Madam Chair spoke about the 50. We are streamlining those things. We have had discussions already with different parts of the public sector that have responsibility for personnel administration in the public sector, and really bringing the evidence forward and advocating for the change that we need to make. And so that's how we will do it. The important thing about the report, it must lay bare what is the situation. We must know what it is before we could fix it, right? And that was the intent behind the report, and is the same intent of all the reports that the OPR could do. I could give you that assurance, right? So while we want to be nurturing, we understand that does not mean that we don't expose what are the weaknesses in the system. So that's how we're going to do it in our multi-pronged approach. We are going to influence and advocate the change. We are going to strengthen where we can, as best as we can, but at the same time, we are also going to enforce, right?
And the reality is that this entire committee, I believe, today has complimented the OPR for that. But I have a couple of questions from viewers online, because we always encourage the viewers to send in their questions. And I have two here that speaks to, has the OPR considered the implementation of online self-paced training courses on its website that is open to the wider public and not just named procurement officers? And the other question is, how has the OPR affected the payment of vendors, especially in Tobago? I'm reading it as I have it. I'm reading it as I have. I didn't add that last part.
Thank you very much for sharing those comments. I'll take the last one and I'll pass the other one to the senior auditor. No, we have not affected the payments at all. There's nothing that we do that could any way stymie payments being made. There's nothing that we do. We require public bodies to report on how their payments as they make it. But no.
So when there is the allegation that is placed at the feet of the OPR, it's not you, because there are allegations that are placed at the feet of the OPR that says the reason why things can't get done or the reason why you have not been paid is the OPR. Yes. So we blame it someone,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. The second question.
All right, and just to add to the first question, the Act does require public bodies on the onset to have confirmation of funding. That is supposed to be within the system to help alleviate the problem of suppliers not being paid on time when work is completed. We do know that there are some challenges with that still occurring within the system. Again, it's systematic changes that need to occur, and we have advocated, and the Act requires, where the funding is not available upon solicitation, so you don't have that confirmation. That should be included so that your suppliers are aware that we don't have the money at this time before you even engage in solicitation, so that they have the ability to then decide, do I want to still be a part of this process or not? It also requires them, the public body, to at least find the funding before the activity is over. All right? So that for us, we won't take blame if the payment is not made, because the system does allow for that. And so it's how the public body prioritize their payments. Just to speak to the LMS, the LMS currently that we have, and I know the question where they're asking for it to be at a wider reach, beyond that of the named procurement officer. Currently, the LMS system has 250 licenses. And so those licenses have been targeted towards the named procurement officers. Each license has a fee. And so we felt as an organization, the best place to start would be with those who have to execute the function. As time goes on and as we have more resources, as well as once we have the ability to put self-paced courses up online, I think that is something that OPR is amenable to. And so there are other training opportunities that are available online. So all of our sessions, all of the public training, the sensitization sessions, they are all available on the resource platforms, including the presentations, etc., the tape sessions. They're all there on OPR's website. You can access them at your convenience at any point in time, but it's not the same modules that are available within the LMS, at least not at the level that it's in the LMS. So you can have some type of training, but it's not going to be at the LMS level, at least not yet.
Thank you for that. And just treating with the compliance in terms of the public bodies that have not been fully compliant. We have another question that came in regarding THA and THA divisions, and whether or not the divisions of the THA and the THA on a whole has been compliant in terms of its reporting to the OPR as required by law. That was the one.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, just also. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Could we just get clarity on whether that question that I'm asking is part of what will be submitted, because in writing, because at least the person who sent the message, the question could hear clearly.
I will pass this on to the senior auditor.
Hi, all right, so specific to Tobago, over the first 12 months, there was a very low reporting compliance in Tobago, extremely low. If we look at the wider Tobago diaspora, so 24 entities, it would have been extremely low. Even those that reported, it would have been the information when we take into consideration what the budgeted spend, the allocation to Tobago is. We felt that it fell way below. It may have been somewhere under 10% of what has been allocated, has been reported to us. However, we did see an improvement in quarter 3 and 4. We still have 3 entities in the THA that are on our current non-compliant list as at the end of quarter 4, so the end of the first full fiscal, which would include the Division of Education and Research and Technology, the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, and the Division of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transport. All of the other entities, they would have at least reported once to the OPR, and we've seen, like I said, in quarter 3 and 4, we saw upward mobility in reporting. And in terms of publishing the ASPPA, which is the annual schedule of planned procurement activities, about 50% of them produce that document that is available for the public to view.
And you've seen the same challenges that you have with ministries you're having as well with the TH?
Yes, and probably to a higher degree within the THA circles.
What do you think is creating that higher degree?
From our one-on-one interactions with some of the bodies, their named procurement officers came on very late. They were new to the systems. They didn't understand. Tobago has a culture of its own, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And so just changing
I'm challenged with the statement.
No, it's not a bad comment.
Okay, go ahead.
It's a recognition of the fact. It's a recognition of the fact that, right, what may work naturally in Trinidad may not always apply in the same way in Tobago, and so we may need to take a very different approach with Tobago. But not to kind of put anything out there, there will be a spotlight in the report that is coming on Tobago, a specific segment, and so we would have additional details provided there.
So there has been outreach specifically for Tobago, or do you plan outreach? for Tobago?
Yes, there has been outreach for Tobago, and I'm going to ask the policy officer to just give you some more details.
Okay.
Thank you, Leslie. So
Quaking in his boots right now, but we will proceed.
So in April of 2024, the OPR, in March of 2024, the OPR launched its Tobago office. And then in April of 2024, we sent a team of people, cross-functional team, ICT, to deal with the depository issues policy, to deal with the handbooks, guidelines, requirements under the Act, simplified regulations. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Yes, so in April, we sent a cross-functional team to Tobago comprising ICT and policy. ICT to deal with the depository. They had a clinic for 3 days, and policy to deal with all the issues related to handbooks, guidelines, compliance with the Act, and the simplified regulations that had just come. So they spent 3 days, and they addressed a number of public bodies as well as other stakeholders who heard OPR was coming to Tobago and joined the workshops on those 3 days.
Thank you, Chair. I know we this was not supposed to be part of our inquiry today, but the member of the public brought Tobago into the mix. So I guess we could stay there for a little while, Chair. Not too long, maybe just about 2 questions.
The member of the public can, wait for the next time while we have some pressing issues for today.
No, what is it? But am I allowed just two, Chair?
I'll allow you one.
All right. What's the complement of your manpower in Tobago, and are there any specific matters that are engaging the OPR at this time in Tobago? Thank you, Chair.
So thank you, Member. Through you, Chair. Right now, we only have 2 officers located in Tobago. The intent is to build out to about 7 officers. But, we send up teams as required, as we schedule the training. That is not an issue, but we understood early on that we needed to have a presence in Tobago to signal our commitment to working with the stakeholders and the Tobago House of Assembly. Just to give you a bit of information, quickly, Chair, we issued a compliance assessment checklist in September. We sent it out to all the public bodies. We started off in Tobago because we want to highlight Tobago in this report. And in subsequent years, we will be highlighting different groups like the RHAs, the regional corporations, which are also very problematic. And the average compliance rate that in what the information they gave us is a survey was 62.8%. So there is still a significant way to go. Our intention at the OPR is to go and sit with the Tobago stakeholders and review that compliance assessment checklist and to agree, much like Chair, what the committee has asked us to do, a roadmap to work with the Tobago stakeholders to reverse that, to improve that compliance figure, I should say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, colleagues. Ms. Khan, I just want to add my commendation for the level of candor here today. And, I sit on 3 of these committees, and it's not often that interacting with public bodies, we have, it's very refreshing to get the real state of play, and I think that's what we've been getting this morning, so I thank you very much for that. A couple of things I want to say. I'm sitting here and it reminds me of in previous incarnations where you needed that paradigm shift. One of them was with the implementation of freedom of information that affected many public bodies, and one of them was when the FIU began and we had to ensure compliance. And I sympathize with you in being the person that has to hold the hand of people who have to get compliant, but you also have to know when to crack the whip and do enforcement. It's very challenging. I've been in your shoes, literally, and it is something. So I just want to say that perhaps You mentioned training, you mentioned staff retention of the people who are trained, and so on. You mentioned collaboration with bodies such as SIPs to have certification. This is something that at the FIU we would have dealt with. And it might be necessary that we look at, and perhaps as a recommendation, that you have within the public service, as you had with freedom of information, a unit dedicated to spearhead the changes needed in the structure of the public service, because, and you could give me your comment on that, because at some point in time, you may have to let go of the chain and take up your enforcement function, which would be difficult for you to manage in terms of the hand-holding aspect of trying to get people compliant, which I understand you're doing almost out of the goodness of your heart at this point in time, because the training and so on is not really your function. But as you rightly said, with all of the training that is done, if you put people back to work in the same system that isn't designed for procurement, we're going to have a challenge. So it might very well be that together with you, some collaboration with UE, Arthur Lockjack, all of these people in development training, but also a restructuring through the Ministry of Public Administration, perhaps, so that we have, because procurement is here to stay. It's not going to go away, even though we may make changes. So we need some structural changes within the public service. That being said, let me get into a couple of questions. And this might be putting a lot of pressure on your office at this point, but I just still want to raise it. We've spoken about sole select, what we call sole select tendering, the micro and small amounts, which is going under the simplified regulations. And I believe that there are also provisions in law for emergency procurements. Is your office involved, or do you intend to, or is it being done right now, where you examine? I imagine you wouldn't be able to examine each one, but would you be doing, for example, a sampling to examine some of these transactions that fall within those categories to ensure that people aren't abusing the system? Because again, I came from the public service, and there was something called the PS spending limit. And I know for a fact that contracts are broken up to get within the PS spending limit to avoid CTB. And that was something that was part of the culture of the public service. So how are we ensuring that we aren't, apart from having a system, what was the word being used? I like the word that was used, but basically building in procurement into your planning, having procurement planning being done and all of that. Do we also want to make sure that we are not avoiding accountability and transparency by using these mechanisms as loopholes? So do you have a system in place right now for that, or is it something that you intend to implement?
Thank you for the question, Member. Through you, Chair. The OPR has the power to go in and do audits. We can do in the public interest anything that the regulator determines is something of public interest. The OPR can go in. So we don't have to wait on a complaint to come in. We can do so. And auditing is the key area that will balance with investigations, right? When something is, there's no, criminal underlying and in terms of investigations and that kind of thing. If you're seeing a procurement irregularity, that when we get the information, it doesn't lead to any allegation of criminal behavior or anything like that, we can go in and do an audit. And we started our audit program late last year. Why didn't we go before? You know, the system was in such a confusion that to go into audit in a system that is just not functioning, it would be a waste of resources, right? So we let it settle, and we are not actually now completing our first audit, right? But the whole issue of monitoring compliance is really about looking at those hidden elements in the data, going behind the mere reporting of the figures and seeing the trends, looking at the circumstances in which certain emergencies are deemed emergency. So we can go in, if we see you reporting a lot on emergencies, even direct contracting, those kinds of things, we can ask for your file. Right? That is part of our monitoring. And as we expand, well, let me say, as we establish the compliance and monitoring, the intent is to assign officers to groups of entities based on our risk universe, our assessment. So part of what we have done is that we have looked at the resources as it flows from the national budget, and we have prioritized public bodies based on the amount of their spend, but also the nature of their spend. And that is where we will be putting the eyes on those groups that are on our list. So we have a list, and we are moving towards that. Yes.
Right. So you're basically going to take a risk-based approach in terms of your audit function.
Yes.
And categorize. And you said you've
Correct.
begun that process of categorizing entities
Yes.
based on the size of their budgets,
Yes.
the amount of spends, and I assume
Yes.
that the amount of sole select, the amount of small things, and the amount
Yes.
of emergency spend will factor
Absolutely.
into that. Okay, so you've gotten to the point of ranking agencies and dividing
We
them.
have indeed.
Okay, that's good. That's a lot of progress, actually. That's the hardest part, and then it's just to roll it out. A second question, and this comes in terms of something that was reported widely, and I think it raised a lot of eyebrows and concerns, and it has to do with challenge proceedings. It was reported that a particular contract was cancelled after two local entities filed challenge proceedings with respect to the award of a contract for housing. And during the standstill period, it was notified that a foreign company had gotten it was the intention to award the contract to a foreign company. When those challenge proceedings were advertised shortly thereafter, the contract was cancelled. My concern is that when something is raised by way of challenge proceedings, and there may be something untoward that the OPR may have wanted to investigate and may have uncovered some sort of wrongdoing or something of the sort, because I have information in front of me that one of the complaints in relation to that particular contract is that the person who they intended to award the contract to was completely non-compliant with town and country planning requirements. And that to me is very significant, that the intention was to award a contract under those circumstances. But the contract then having been cancelled after the challenge proceedings were advertised essentially removes oversight of the procurement regulator. Well, that is the perception in the public. So that's what I would like some clarification on, whether or not the procurement regulator has the power to still examine the intention to award that contract and what may have transpired, and whether or not in relation to that specific contract that we are speaking about, which I could say it's reported, the Santa Rosa housing project, whether or not you have taken any action to look at the intention to award that contract under the circumstances that would have been brought to your attention by the challenge proceedings.
Thank you, Member, and through you, Chair. I spoke previously about the OPR can go in to public bodies and ask for files if it is a matter of public interest. All right? And notwithstanding the fact, as you explained, what transpired with that, the OPR is currently in that that was our first audit. It's not yet completed, but we are in there examining the books. So yes, notwithstanding that it was not awarded and the matter was withdrawn out of the challenge proceedings, the OPR did go in. And we are there now looking at the books because we believe it is in the public interest, right? And not because the challenge proceeding had ended prematurely, that would have been the end of it. Our jurisdiction continues. It was a procurement process that was started. And yes, so the audit is currently underway.
Would the findings of your audits be made public?
So I would let my senior auditor answer that.
All right, so the audit report in itself will not be made public initially, and And it would not be made public initially because that's not the process. There's nothing in the law that requires us to actually publish the audit reports, but through the annual reporting, we can report certain findings to Parliament. So that report will go firstly to the named procurement officer and the accounting officer to whom the Act would have spoken. It would also go to the audit committee of that particular entity, as well as to the line minister for that particular ministry under which the public body would fall. So those would be the bearers of the report initially, but in the annual report, there would be details of recommendations, findings, etc.
Madam Chair. Thank you very much. This is to the Ministry of Finance. With respect to the powers or the provisions in the Act that deals with disposal of state lands, regulations had to be made in order to dispose of state lands under the Act, and that's something that didn't find itself in the CTB but now finds itself in the Public Procurement Act. And what is concerning to me is that based on the response we got from the Ministry of Finance is that regulations were drafted with respect to the disposal of state lands in 2021-2022, submitted to Cabinet on 2 occasions but not approved. And these regulations will determine how a public body goes about the process, the procedure to dispose of state lands. Government is going to undertake one of the largest disposal of state property, which is defined as state lands, which is the Petrotrin refinery. And that particular project or that disposal has already been, we see that there were tenders, persons expressed interest in terms of the refinery. There were issues with respect to one of the persons who had interest and where he was from in terms of the country of origin. And we are now seeing, or we are now being told that Cabinet has rejected the regulations, and we're told also that this year is the year in which the disposal of the refinery will take place. Can you indicate from the perspective of the Ministry of Finance whether or not we will have these regulations in time for the disposal of the refinery, or whether the refinery will be subjected to any regulation?
Thank you, Member. Through you, Chair. I can't speak to that particular disposal, but with respect to the regulations, I just want to refine something that you said. It's not that it was rejected.
It's not approved.
Yeah.
Not approved.
Not approved, as yet. It is under deliberations at the Finance and General Purposes Committee. In my response, I said a committee of Cabinet. It is the Finance and General Purposes Committee. That's a committee of ministers, and the ministers would look at the proposal a little more closely to see what the implications are, make sure they are then in tune with government policy, and come back to the public servant for the necessary processes that have to be done. So that really is what is happening at the moment.
So can I ask, maybe this might fall under the OPR, and this is a question that we may have to think of. Can we dispose of the refinery without these regulations because the Act is fully proclaimed?
Member, I'll be honest, I cannot say. I don't want to, I haven't thought through that. But even in the absence of regulations specifically, we did provide some guidance on the disposal, guidance related to best practice in disposal of real property, and best practice in alignment with the requirements of the Act, right? That is as far as the OPR went in this particular matter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
We've had a grilling session. And I must thank you for the way that you've come to us and answer the question as honestly and as comprehensively as you have. And in spite of that, I see the willingness on your faces to return. And I thank you in advance for that. So you will be advised as to exactly when, but soon, before Carnival, we will have you here again. But I must ask you one more favor to present closing remarks for this particular session. So we're not saying goodbye, we're saying au revoir, and from the officials, the chairs.
Thank you, Madam
Michelle
Chair.
Durham Kissoon. And
Should I go first or
Yes.
PS?
It doesn't matter really.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you very much for the rich discussion. I started off the session today by saying that we report solely to the Parliament, and we really welcome the opportunity to engage and to share the work that we have been doing. Today we spoke a lot about the challenges in the system, and I want to say that the OPR is not daunted at all, because we understand that this is a good thing for Trinidad and Tobago. We have talked about public procurement reform for about 6 decades, and notwithstanding the challenges, it is here and we need to make it work. And as the regulatory body, the OPR commits to doing its part to growing the system, that it would benefit the people of this country for years to come. We give that commitment. We continue to uphold our independence. We continue to pay particular attention to public trust and confidence. We know a lot a lot of people are depending on us to do it. Where we need to be, we will adopt the posture of helping and accommodating certain things, because we see the challenges on a day-to-day basis, real life, but at the same time, the OPR is first and foremost the regulatory body, and therefore we are the guardians of the whole legislative framework, and we see ourselves as the guardians of the public purse. One of the guardians, that is. Thank you very much, members.
I've heard 3 different dates for when the act came into force. I've heard the 25th of April, I've heard the 26th, and I heard the 9th of May. Which is the correct one?
April 26th, Chair.
26th, not 25th?
No, 26th.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the viewing public. We thank you for the lively discussion. We are open to continuing the dialogue and working with the OPR in facilitating the whole process and the new regime. Thank you.
So we've come to the end of this very lively and enlightening session. And when I review what we've heard today, one word comes to mind. And this is a word that was emphasized when we opened the door at the cathedral. And the Archbishop spoke about hope. Because this is about good governance, you know. And what you are doing, what you're charged to do, is what gives the country hope for good governance. And I thank you, and I look forward to your coming again to give us even more hope in this 2025. It is a year of hope. All is not lost. We must believe that we can get it right in our country. Thank you. Of the public switch off their devices, I would like to advise them and you that the committee's 10th report on an